On today's show, the Heat are playing their best basketball of the season, but where do they rank among the other hot teams in the league? And does this change how we feel about Boston being the team to beat in the East? Plus, some stats that show why Jimmy Butler should embrace being a three-point shooter and an interesting buyout option that the Heat can explore. All of that and more on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Got a great show for you today. We're going solo, no co-host. David Ramil out today. He'll be back for tomorrow's show. I'm going to get to whether Jimmy Butler really should try to be more of a three-point shooter and if he should try to get into the three-point contest. Not really, but we will be talking about his three-point shooting later on. But I want to start with looking at the last 10 games for the Heat and comparing this stretch with the other top teams over that stretch in the league. Over at NBA.com, you can filter all the stats for the last 10 games, and it's something that I like to do from time to time just to get more of a snapshot as to what the league looks like, not just for the Miami Heat, but where they are versus their competition in the Eastern Conference. We all know that the Heat have been winning a ton of games lately, 11 in the last 13, all these things. A big win over the Jazz on Saturday that I want to touch on here in a little bit, but Boston is rolling with the league's longest win streak right now. They've won now 11 games in a row. The Milwaukee Bucks are starting to figure things out under Doc Rivers. So when you're able to sort of filter these stats out, net rating, offensive rating, defensive rating, some of the individual player stats, some of the deeper dive stuff, like you're able to kind of get a better snapshot as to not just how Miami is performing, but how they're performing against their competition, because obviously that's how this works. And when the Heat are playing as well as they have, we talk about that, but then you have to zoom out and say, okay, well, if they're playing this well, does this change how I think about their chances in the Eastern Conference? All right, so we're going to touch on all these things, and then I'm going to give you basically a top 5 teams in the league, not just the East, but teams in the league over these basically last 10 games when teams are starting to kind of get things to click and ramp up for what things should look like in the playoffs. So the Heat, let's start with them. Over these last 10 games, they are 4th in net rating, outscoring their opponents by 9.2 points every 100 possessions. They're 8-2 during that stretch. So I know that they've been winning a little bit more even before that, but 10 games is a nice round number. I think it's a good snapshot. So we're just going to take the 10 games. So they're 8-2 in that stretch, outscoring their opponents by 9.2 points per 100 possessions. That's behind that 4th net rating behind Boston, who's just crazy plus 20.7 net rating. Minnesota is plus 11.2, and Milwaukee is a plus 10. So the Heat just a hair behind the Milwaukee Bucks. The Heat are 8th in offensive rating, scoring 116 points every 100 possessions. They're 3rd in defensive rating, allowing just 106.8 points every 100 possessions. Look, you look over that schedule also. Strength of schedule matters. The Heat have statement wins over the Bucks, the Pelicans, the Kings, all those games on the road. You compare that to some of the other teams, the Celtics, they've got statement wins over this 10-game streak over the Heat, Warriors, Mavericks, and Knicks. The Bucks have a statement win over the Nuggets, another one over the Timberwolves. And the Timberwolves, who I'm mentioning here because they're playing really well, they have a statement win over the Bucks and the Clippers. The Timberwolves and the Bucks played each other twice during that 10-game stretch. They split that series. So they got statement wins over each other, but also losses to each other, for whatever that's worth. Individual, Jimmy Butler, playing awesome. When you go to the biggest reason why Miami is starting to click, it's because Jimmy Butler's playing like an all-NBA player. He's 18th in scoring over that stretch at almost 24 points per game, 23.8 to be exact. He's shooting 54.3% overall, 53% on threes, 7 rebounds and 7.3 assists. We can go into some of these other guys, but Jimmy Butler playing like this, two-way basketball, the steals, over 2 steals a game. Defensively, just what he's doing on a man-to-man basis, just overall. Offensively, getting to the basket, all those things that he's doing. I love the side pick and roll stuff that he's got going with Bam Adebayo. Bam's also been playing awesome. I actually think his defense, eye test-wise, has ticked up a notch over this last stretch, and I think that's partly because he doesn't have to do so much offensively, right? Because Jimmy Butler is carrying the mantle for this team on the offensive end. So when he is that number one guy, when he is your all NBA player, and I say this all the time, but I love the next man up stuff with Miami. I love like the undrafted guys and everybody's just, how does Eric Spoelstra keep finding these guys? All that stuff's great. All that stuff is great. But at the end of the day, you need your best players to play like your best players. And when Jimmy Butler is sort of coasting through the regular season, you know, and like he's said things recently like how, playoff Jimmy, all these things. He did a whole interview with Chris Haynes at Bleacher Report talking about how playoff Jimmy is a real thing. How he talks about, okay, you get to this post All-Star break, and that's when the playoff stuff really starts to happen. And this is sort of the part of the season that he lives for. And I love that. I love that we have like this other gear that Jimmy Butler can get to. But that all like when we talk about that other gear, you also have to talk about the other side of that coin, which is he kind of coasts through the first few months of the season. And when he does that, it puts a lot of pressure on guys like Bam and Tyler Hero when he's healthy and all these other sort of role players to step up and try to play bigger than their roles. And I think, again, going big picture, I think it helps Miami because it does force these guys to just get better, right? Like you're throwing these guys into the fire. Hey, Jaime Jaquez, I know you're a rookie, but you're going to have to run offense for us in crunch time in like December and January. Sorry, but Jimmy Butler's just not doing it right now. He's waiting until the playoffs. So, so all that stuff's good, but it also makes it really difficult to put some wins together. And that's why Miami has sort of hovered around 500 basically during the pre-All-Star break stretch during the Jimmy Butler tenure. But then when Jimmy Butler kind of cranks it up a notch after the All-Star break, you just see how everything just falls into place, right? Bam Adebayo could just be the second scorer and be awesome defensively, be a top 5 player defensively in the league. It helps Duncan Robinson just be a shooter. Tyler Hero could play off the ball a little bit more. You're not asking Caleb Martin and Jaime Jaquez and all these other guys to do quite as much, and everything just sort of falls into place. The puzzle starts to make a little bit more sense. So he's playing like that now, and that's why Miami has played their best stretch of basketball of the season. I think sometimes we overthink this stuff. Okay, is it the zone? Is it just like, okay, can you get more out of these role players? What are we going to do with the 13th spot on the roster? Like, we love to talk about all these things, but at the end of the day, you just need your best player to play like your best player. And that makes the biggest difference in the world, more than just like, okay, like, are we getting signed DeLon Wright on the buyout market, even though he's been a good addition for Miami? It's Jimmy Butler playing like this. That's been the biggest difference for the Heat. So he's a big reason why Miami's 8-2 over the last 10 games and why that net rating is what it is. All right. So I want to get into a few more things here, but let's just get right into the power rankings. Look, I love how the Heat have been playing, but you can't look at what they have done over these last 10 games and say that they're better than Boston right now. You just can't. Now, let me be clear, and I'll get to this in a little bit, but that doesn't mean that I don't think the Heat can't beat the Boston Celtics in a playoff series. I'm just saying, body of work, what's in front of us? Like, the Celtics have won 10 games in a row. They have a net rating of over 20 points. They're outscoring teams by 20 points per 100 possessions, and that's not all that different than what they've done all season long, right? And they've been playing even better over this last stretch. A big part of that is Jason Tatum. Tatum's averaging like 27.5 points on 50% shooting, 8.5 rebounds, and 6.5 assists. Jaylen Brown is playing really well. Golden State on Sunday, just like this weird defensive strategy of putting Draymond Green on Jaylen Brown, but having him sag off of Jaylen Brown, daring Jaylen Brown to shoot. I'm like, Jaylen Brown's not Steph Curry from three-point range. I'm not saying that, but when you leave him wide open, the dude can make shots. I think he's proven that. And he did. And that was like one of the most lopsided games I've ever seen. It was kind of a gimmicky defensive strategy by Golden State, and it backfired. And they lost that game basically in the first quarter when it was like 42-22 at some point. And that was it. But that's what the Boston Celtics are doing. They're just beating the doors off of people. They've got those statement wins over the Heat, the Warriors, the Mavericks, and the Knicks over this stretch. Jason Tatum playing like that. No, I don't think Jason Tatum is an MVP candidate. I think we need to put that away. That's total like classic Boston media mafia hype kind of stuff, right? Oh, what best player on the best team? Like, why are we not talking about him? Because he's not as good as Luka Doncic. He's not as good as Nikola Jokic. He's not been as good as Shea. Like, he's just not been as good as those guys. Even Anthony Edwards over the stretch, third in the league in scoring at almost 29 points per game. Giannis has been playing better than Jason Tatum. I don't know that you could tell me, hey, is Jason Tatum just better than those guys this year? There's no way. Eye test, stat-wise, like there's no argument to be made. Jason Tatum's having an awesome year. He's going to be on the All-NBA team, probably second team, I would guess, and that's great. And the Celtics are an awesome team overall, but we can also just be like, hey, the Celtics are an awesome team, best starting five in the league. they seem like world beaters right now, but we don't also have to give Jason Tatum the MVP. We don't have to do that at the same time. So let's relax on the Jason Tatum MVP stuff. He doesn't have to be part of this conversation. We know who the guys are. It's not Tatum this year, even though he's having a great year and he's playing even better lately. I've got the Nuggets at number 2 in my power rankings. They've won 6 games in a row. Their net rating over that stretch, they're outscoring teams by 14.6 points every 100 possessions. They've got statement wins over the Warriors, the Kings, the Heat, and the Lakers. I loved how the Heat played them on Thursday night. I thought they played them close. I thought that the Nuggets on the second night of a back-to-back didn't have their best game, but also the Heat were missing a bunch of dudes. And to me, I look at that game and I say, hey, if these are the 2 teams that are left in June, I think most people would probably take the Nuggets in that series. I wouldn't have a problem with them doing it, but I like the Heat. I like the Heat's chances more in a series in June this time around, if there was a rematch, than their chances even last year, because I just think the Heat are a better team and they know how to play Denver a little bit better now. I've got Minnesota. All right, you know what? I'm going Miami at number 3. I had Minnesota originally before I started this thing, just because like the net rating and all that stuff, like all their stats, it's more Timberwolves, but they've got good wins over the Bucks and the Clippers. I think that Clippers win last week was huge for Minnesota, kind of getting over the hump. Can Rudy Gobert play in like against a 5-out offense like the Clippers against Kawhi and James Harden and all these things? But I just trust the Heat a little bit more. I've got the Milwaukee Bucks at number 5. I feel pretty good about it. Their schedule has been softer than Miami and Boston and some of these other teams, but they do have a big win over the Nuggets a couple weeks ago. Softer schedule, but the defense seems to be clicking under Doc Rivers a little bit. I want to see them against bigger competition, tougher competition, see if that defense is legit. Honorable mention to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Can't do a top 5 power rankings without mentioning them. They got a big win over Phoenix on Sunday. SGA is he's going from averaging 31 points per game to 32 points per game over these last 10 games. He's playing amazing. Jalen Williams is a star in the making. Chet Holmgren's been awesome. The Thunder are terrifying. So that's my top 5. I got the Celtics, the Nuggets, the Heat, the Timberwolves, and the Milwaukee Bucks. That's my power rankings over the last 10 games. And man, that says a lot based on where the Miami Heat were for most of this season. When they are playing like this, it is proof of concept that you don't want to play them in the Eastern Conference. Would I give them a chance against the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference playoff series? Based on this, look, seeds 4 through 8 are basically 2 games apart right now in the East standings. I think Miami's going to end up with the 4th or the 5th seed. That's kind of where I'm at. Jalen Brunson got hurt for the Knicks. They're saying it's minor, but we'll see what happens. I think the Heat are going to end up with the 4th or 5th seed, which means that they're probably going to meet the Boston Celtics in the second round. Woo! If I'm the Celtics, I don't want to see Miami. I'm looking at the bracket and I'm like, how long can we avoid that team in the playoffs? I think most people would pick Boston. I think they would. I think there's going to be a lot of people picking Miami if that's the playoff series in the second round. I think the Heat have proved that they can go toe-to-toe with the Boston Celtics. They got blown out a few weeks ago. I understand that. But they played them close in their next matchup after that. The Celtics are 3-0 over the Heat all season. They don't play again during the regular season. But, man, the playoffs are just different. And if Miami's playing like this, you can't count them out. What does Jimmy Butler shooting threes do for Miami's offense? And should he be shooting even more? We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Heat. Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Jimmy Butler went 3 for 3 on Saturday's win over the Jazz. Eric Spoelstra, after the game, joked about Jimmy being in the three-point contest. A nice kind of lighthearted Eric Spoelstra after a bunch of wins. Can't blame him. Jimmy Butler has been shooting a ton of threes lately. Those ones in Saturday's game were big. Hit a couple from the corner. I think the first one was like a tough step-back jumper where he had to kind of shove the defender out of the way, step back into a three-pointer in that crowded corner, and that's a tough shot to make. A lot of these are kind of tough to make lately. He's making the tough ones. He's also making a lot of wide-open ones. I joke that Jimmy Butler shoots threes like, a guy playing blackjack and he only goes in with or like Texas Hold'em, and he only goes in with like pocket aces. But he's making some tougher ones lately, so that's been less of the case over these last couple games. Jimmy Butler is 16 of 28 from three-point range over these last 14 games. Over 56% from three-point range. That's crazy. And there's stats to back up the fact that Jimmy Butler needs to shoot more threes. So inherently, the Heat have some difficulty building out their offense, especially in the half court and their roster in general, when your two best players are Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, who are awesome top 15 players, but they're not three-point shooters. And in today's NBA, it's really hard to build a functional half-court offense when your two top players who need the ball the most, arguably, aren't really shooting threes. And we have talked on this show a lot. It's been a talking point among Heat fans. Like, Bam Adebayo's got to shoot more threes. Bam's got to shoot more threes. And yet, when we talk about Bam shooting more threes and how he has to stretch his game, part of that is that he's younger than Jimmy, right? And that there's ostensibly a ceiling that he has yet to reach, where with Jimmy, we kind of know what he is because of his age. But I think it also lets Jimmy Butler off the hook a little bit because he's shown that he can make those threes. And there was a point in his career, Chicago, Minnesota, Philadelphia, that he shot threes. Like, he was never taking 7 a game, but he was shooting them like at a normal amount, 2 or 3 a game. And I think that's fine. And when he gets playing like this, when he's shooting 2 or 3 a game, like he has over these last couple of months, this last month rather, that makes a big difference to Miami's offense. All of a sudden, teams got to close out to him a little bit more. It gives him a little bit more room when they start closing out on those threes to beat those closeouts, get those blow bys, get downhill and get to the basket. It spaces the floor not only for Jimmy Butler, but for Bam Adebayo in the paint. It creates openings for other guys. When Jimmy Butler's got that three-point shot going, and like I said, those other guys got to close out, and he's attacking those closeouts, it creates like those flare opportunities for guys like Caleb Martin and Duncan Robinson to play off of them and get more threes. It just, like, I don't have to explain why three-point shooting is good in the NBA. I think we should all know that. Like, it just generates more offense. It gets the gears running. But beyond just like the eye test stuff, and obviously those last games where Miami's been playing well, like, I'm not saying that the Heat are winning because Jimmy Butler is taking those threes, but it's not hurting, right? Jimmy Butler playing aggressive is the main thing, like I talked about in the first segment. But part of that aggressiveness is the shooting of the threes. And he doesn't have to shoot a ton of them, but I like that he shoots them when they're there, and that he shoots them at the end of the shot clock, and he's a little bit more comfortable, and he's a little bit less passive, a little bit less, okay, like, it's the last 5 seconds on the clock. Let me just go get a shot. Let me ISO. Let me just go get a shot. Let me play like a superstar, right? And I think the Heat are better when he's doing that. Beyond that stuff, the stats back it up. Jimmy Butler, since he's joined the Miami Heat in 2019, these are regular season and playoff games. The Heat are 36-24 when he makes 2 or more threes in a game. That is a 50-win pace, which is basically better than every season but one. That 1 year that Miami got the number 1 seed, Kyle Lowry's first year in Miami. Every year but one, the Heat have not reached 50-win pace seasons in every Jimmy Butler season except one of them. But when he's shooting when he makes 2 or more threes in a game, they win games at a 50-win pace. So that to me is notable. It's even more when he makes 3 or more threes in a game. The Heat are 11-4 when Jimmy takes or makes 3 or more threes in a game. That's a 60-win pace. So basically, when Jimmy Butler, since he's been on the Heat, and if he's making 3 or more threes in a game, the Heat have been a 60-win team, elite. They have been an elite basketball team. It's a little thing. I don't really love the stats of when he does this, the Heat or that kind of stats, but I do think that these ones matter. Because we all see it, right? When he's playing like this, the Heat are playing better and they win more games. And coincidentally, they do play like this in the playoffs, which is part of the playoff Jimmy Butler magic, right? It's, all right, I go from going in the basket, just kicking out the shooters, being a little bit more passive, relying on the free throw line and those kinds of things to, all right, I'm going to use the whole menu. I'm going to use the whole court now. Why shouldn't he be playing better? And when he's playing better, why shouldn't Miami be playing better? So all of this stuff makes sense. I would love Jimmy Butler to just shoot more threes. That's the part of this that I don't understand. Is it's not hard to shoot threes. It's not harder on the body to shoot threes. If anything, you would think when you're coasting, you would be shooting more threes, right? Like we have seen LeBron James, for instance, extend the prime of his career by including the three-point line into his game more often. Like now he's shooting like 5, 6, 7 three-pointers a game. He's the Lakers' best three-point shooter, arguably, this season, which is a whole other problem for them, but whatever. Like, he has evolved into a legitimate three-point shooter who takes them at a high volume. I think Jimmy Butler can extend his prime if he were to embrace that three-point game. That stuff is easier on your body. Go to the basket less. And I know he said this after the Utah Jazz game. Why wouldn't you, he asked in some way, shape, or form, like, why aren't you shooting more threes? And he says, look, I'll shoot the threes when it's this time of the year, but I love to just get downhill and see who gets knocked down first. And I love that. Look, I love when Jimmy Butler is playing like that, and he is at his best when he's getting to the paint, getting the and one foul calls, getting the other team in foul trouble, getting the Heat into the bonus, all these things. But like over the course of a regular season, you would think he would be taking even more threes because it's just easier to do that than to barrel into those guys in December and January and even in February. So I would like to see Jimmy Butler in the future, in the regular season, take more threes because I think it would be easier on his body. It could extend his prime, and I think it would still loosen things up. If he became a guy that teams had to close out on and guard at the 3-point line, that just makes things easier for Bam and everybody else too. So, and I think we'll eventually see it. I think we're just going to have to see it the way that LeBron had to do it. I think Jimmy Butler at some point is going to have to do it, and I think it can. And if that extends his prime, obviously that's only going to be better for the Miami Heat. All right, last segment coming up. Should the Heat look to the buyout market to add one more veteran for the playoffs? We talk about an interesting option after this here on Locked On Heat. Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Plus, it's demon time on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at PrizePicks. Squares marked with a red demon or a green goblin get you different payouts, so you got to check out what those payouts are. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Plus, PrizePicks offers quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and enormous selection of players and stat types. That's what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Around like 6:30, 7 o'clock before the NBA games tip off, I like to open up the app on my phone, check out some of the more than or less than stat projections, check out the demons and the goblins, check out like, okay, what combination of demons, goblins, stat projections am I taking over on LeBron James threes? Am I going over on the Terry Rozier assists, which has been a sneaky kind of easy play lately? The Terry Rozier assist numbers have been good when he's been on the court. Okay, what's my best combination? Let me see how I can win the most money. Pick more than or less than on about 4 to 5 players I usually average, and then go from there. And it just makes the whole NBA watching experience just a little bit more interesting. So go check out PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use that code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Are you an everydayer? Make sure you're tuning in for our recaps after Heat games over the week. Miami Heat play Tuesday night against the Detroit Pistons, a home game at Kaseya Center. David and I will be back on Tuesday night with a recap of that game. We're actually going to have one more episode before that as well for Tuesday morning. So we'll have that ready to go for you first thing Tuesday morning for your commute to work. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like us on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube right now, hit that little like button. Leave a comment. Let us know where you're listening from. What you think about the Miami Heat's winning stretch. Did I rank them too low? Did I put them too high? What do you think about Miami versus Boston, potentially in an Eastern Conference playoff series? Should Jimmy Butler be shooting more threes? Let us know in the comments what you think. We're going to get to a couple of Twitter questions that we got from over the weekend. This one comes in response to a tweet that my co-host David Ramil tweeted from our Locked On Heat account during Saturday's win. So here's what David tweeted from the account. Maybe we should start talking about playoff Caleb too, because he's been great today. 18 points, including a huge 3 late in the fourth quarter, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 blocks. Our friend Taskmaster retweeted it and added, Caleb follows the Jimmy Butler calendar. And that got me thinking, like, okay, is there such thing as a playoff Caleb? I thought it was a good thing for David to point out. I don't know what the threshold has to be in terms of like what kind of like rank player you have to be in order to have also like the playoff moniker attached to your name in this time, or are you just a guy who's playing well? You know, I don't know that Caleb Martin is doing the Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is pretty open about, hey, I kind of pace myself through the regular season, and then I just kick things into gear in the ramp up to the playoffs. Post All-Star break, let's ramp up to the playoffs. Let's get playing well, and let's go into the playoffs. And I love it. I love it. I think it works for Miami. I think that much has been proven. Caleb kind of had I thought he played well during the regular season last year, but wasn't shooting as well as you'd like, and then he just shot better in the playoffs. I don't know that you plan for that. It's like, okay, I'm just going to not shoot great in the regular season, and then in the playoffs, I'm going to just start making those threes that I wasn't making. That, to me, was the biggest difference in last year's regular season and playoffs. This year, let's not forget, like, Caleb Martin got off to a slow start with some injuries. Was dealing with, like, a hamstring and a quad injury and stuff like that. And has kind of, you could tell, like, it's been a reoccurring thing for him. There's times where he just looks like he has it. There's other games, there's like a couple of games in a row here from there that it just doesn't look like he has it, like, physically. But I thought he had it on Saturday against the Jazz. I thought he was awesome, and it was playoff Caleb. Like, that's what, if we think playoff Caleb as in, like, what he did in the Eastern Conference Finals last year, that was awesome. I don't know that we can expect him to just, like, turn it on and be that. But here's the thing with Caleb Martin, beyond just sort of like the nicknames and stuff, he's playing better lately. And that's been a huge reason also why Miami has been playing better lately. He gives them, when he plays like this, a guy that Eric Spoelstra is going to trust to close games. Because we already know mostly, like, okay, he's going to go with Jimmy. He's going to go with Bam. If Tyler Hero's healthy, he's usually in the game late. There's just guys he trusts. And Caleb Martin is one of those guys, but only when he's got it physically. And so when he's healthy and that three-point shot is falling, he becomes absolutely bona fide, legitimate, no doubt about it, a guy who you're going to close with. And so Spo has been starting Nikola Jovic at power forward lately, but he's been closing a lot with Caleb Martin. And I think that's noteworthy. I think that's going to be the trend going forward if these guys keep playing like this. Now, we'll see when Tyler Hero gets back if Nikola Jovic is going to keep his spot in the starting lineup. It's weird. Eric Spoelstra will be like, all right, you're starting, you're playing a bunch of minutes, and then when we're healthy, you're just, like, out of the rotation. We'll see. I don't really know what the plan is for Nico. I think he's earned rotation minutes, but I also think it's hard to get rotation minutes when this team is really healthy. This team is really deep, and I don't know where Eric Spoelstra goes. And if you believe that Caleb Martin's your best guy to close with, then you can open with him. We've seen him open with Caleb Martin at power forward. Does he go back to that rotation, which might force Nico out of the rotation? Who knows? But Caleb Martin playing like this, big deal. Make sure he's fresh, though. I would be looking at his minutes, monitor his minutes, make sure that he's fresh for the playoffs, because that's the biggest thing for him right now. Let's go to Umar, who wrote in. He actually sent me a screenshot of a Shams tweet that the Spurs are buying out Marcus Morris, and that Marcus Morris is looking to join a contender for the playoffs. And Umar writing in, on top of that, should the Heat sign him, the Heat need size, shooting, defense, and a dog, to use Umar's verbiage there. But look, Marcus Morris, interesting name. We've obviously been down the Markieff Morris path before. He didn't really play for Miami a couple of years ago after getting hit in the back by Nikola Jokic, was basically out for the rest of the season. But the Morris twins, they're big, both of them 6'8", like 220. They're physical, they're aggressive, they're kind of mean. And Marcus Morris has been the better one, the better twin for their careers. Has 10 seasons of averaging at least double-digit points. It's fallen off lately. The shooting percentages have not been where you'd want them to be. Like, he's shooting 44% this year, 42% last year, 43% the year before that. The guy's really inefficient. Takes way too many shots that you want. Like, literally 2 years ago for the Clippers, shot almost 13 attempts per game. I know that they've had injuries and stuff, but even last year, 10 field goal attempts per game. Like, he's sort of a volume shooter. Defensively, he's not what he was, like, in his prime. Marcus Morris at this stage of his career is 34 years old. So I don't know that that's the answer. And if you're looking at him as a guy who you might be able to plug and play as your starting power forward, or even like a rotation backup power forward, like, bring him in. I don't know that that's enough of an upgrade over a guy like Nikola Jovic, Caleb Martin, Haywood Highsmith. That'd be worth sort of rocking the boat and what Miami's got going now. Not only that, but the Heat have 15 guys under contract now after having signed DeLon Wright on the buyout market, who was a slam dunk home run buyout addition. So you would have to waive somebody. And you can't waive Drew Smith because of the CBA. Like, after he was ruled out for the season with the knee injury, you're not allowed to waive him. I thought that they might try to trade him before the deadline to open up another roster spot. They weren't able to make that trade. Drew Smith remains on the roster. So they've got 15 guys under contract. Well, who are you cutting? Like, you're not going to cut DeLon Wright. He's been a good addition. Like, you're not, like, could you cut Thomas Bryant? Maybe. I don't know. Like, you're cutting Thomas Bryant and then eating that salary cap money and then picking up Marcus Morris on a vet minimum deal where, all right, now you got to pay that extra luxury tax. Like, is Marcus Morris that much of an upgrade over Thomas Bryant? Like, maybe more versatility there. But again, I don't know how much he's going to even play if you were to hypothetically sign Marcus Morris. So look, I think it's an interesting name. It's not a direction I would go in. And if Marcus Morris is looking to contribute to a playoff team, like there's no guaranteed minutes here. So are you going to really recruit your problem, right? College coaches always talk about this. I'm not going to go and recruit my problems. That would be similar to this, like not calling Marcus Morris a problem necessarily, but if this is a guy who wants playing time, it's kind of the same thing with PJ Tucker. If these guys want playing time and the Heat don't have that playing time to offer, then why would you bring that player into your locker room and then risk that player getting upset because that playing time that they're looking for isn't there the same way it wasn't there the last place that they played. So Marcus Morris, interesting name, would not go that direction with the Heat. And by the way, I don't expect them to go that direction just because, or in any direction. I think this is the team. These are the 15 guys on the roster. I think that's what it's going to be. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. We'll be back tomorrow morning with David Ramil with another episode, and then Tuesday night with our reactions of Miami's game over the Detroit Pistons. Thanks for listening.